Welcome to today's Awesome Marriage Podcast. I have a special guest today. Ken Guidroz has served in pastoral ministry. He has worked in the corporate world. He is the author of the new book, Letters to My Son in Prison. Ken experienced serious challenges with his three boys. It led to exiting the ministry into 10 years in a spiritual desert. Today, he shares this story with us. Ken is open and transparent. This is a powerful podcast, so let's go right to the studio. Well, Ken, thank you so much for coming on the Awesome Marriage Podcast today. Appreciate you saying yes. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation and about your new book, Letters to My Son in Prison. And we got a lot of great things to talk about. So thank you for being here.
I think we do have some very interesting things to talk about. And you are very welcome. The honor's mine.
Well, thank you so much. So let's let people know a little background in your life leading up to the time period that you write about in the book, Letters to My Son in Prison.
We had been married about 30 years when a lot of this stuff started happening. I had actually served in the ministry out of college for about 10 years and traveled throughout the country. In fact, ended up in Toronto and then landing here in LA. You know, normal family, good family, had three sons, pretty close in age, a good marriage. You know, we did well. You know, after 10 years in the ministry with three young boys, we were a little bit fried. So we left Toronto. They were kicking the Americans out and landed in LA and stayed involved in our church. And, you know, it was a great family community. Boys did well playing sports and, you know, just the typical upbringing. And then right at about my 40th birthday, our local church had been searching for a pastor for many years. And we had, you know, had different people come and go. And finally, they looked at my wife and I, Joyce and I, and said, hey, you know, how about if you lead our church? And of course, we were honored and it was great, you know, to go back in the ministry at 40, having learned what I learned. My sons were knocking on the door of adolescence. The oldest was 13, 14. So it had been, in some ways, golden years up to then. It'd been really, you know, I don't know if you've experienced this or if you agree with me, but, you know, that age group of like 9 to 12 is pretty golden. It's pretty sweet. And you almost start feeling like, man, I'm an awesome parent. Like, I didn't realize how good of a parent I was.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. So that was kind of the condition of going back in the ministry. And then, you know, serving for another 5 years prior to a lot of things kind of imploding a bit.
Yes. Wow. So I agree. I was thinking about that the other day with my grandkids because they're all growing up too. But you're on the pedestal for a while. They just look up to you. It's kind of like what you say goes. And that changes. And
it changes.
I don't know why we thought it was going to be different because I'm sure my parents would say, "Oh yeah, that's when you did that too." You know, so it's normal, and yet it comes, I think, a little bit of a shock. You kind of look and, are you the same person that was here last year? And
exactly,
you know, because there's some differences there. Yeah, that's really good. So how challenging it was for you and Joyce. Well, let's just talk about the challenges, I guess, first as they came, and then how you guys got on the same pages with parenting as you face those challenges.
Yeah. So the ministry went well for a while, for a couple of years. Things were good. My eldest, you know, joined the church, was baptized, became a Christian. You know, and things were going really, really well. But he did reach a point where he started feeling the pressure. He felt the pressure from me as the pastor. It was a very family-oriented church and, you know, strong teen group. And again, that was great for a while. But then he started feeling the pressure. He was a good basketball player. So he kind of was, you know, as a sophomore, brought up to varsity. So he started getting attention. You know, and new temptations started coming his way, and he was very authentic. He was honest with me, and as that year or two started, you know, he started experiencing those challenges. He started to feel like he couldn't maintain his faith, and decided to actually not claim to be a Christian, or to be a Christian, but not, you know, really with the teen group. And right. we ended up having this incredible talk. It was in and out right near me here. And he was just, you know, very bold. For a 16-year-old, he was very bold and very straightforward. Dad, listen, I know you're the pastor, but I'm struggling here. You know, that kind of a talk. And it was in some ways incredible. But also then it ricocheted and it became a real challenge for me. Here I am leading this church, all these families, all these teens, right? And mine is going the other way. And
Yeah.
so it started to create this dynamic. The second son came in. He too played basketball, he got some of the same things. All of a sudden, our family starts to unravel. What we
Mm.
thought, 2 or 3 years before was a good foundation really started to present a challenge. And I mean, Dr. Kim, my head was spinning. I mean,
I bet.
spinning. I started to struggle. Then our church had a crisis, like a worldwide crisis. And it just was one thing after another. I lasted 5 years in the ministry, that period, but I hobbled out. It was not
Mm.
elegant. It was not beautiful. My sons were struggling. And during that struggle, kind of that preacher kid thing started taking, and they almost like went extra hard, the other way to be the prodigal. And it was a wild time. So that then, that is what kind of was the catalyst. But then it continued as they left high school. My middle son got addicted to opioids
Mm.
and really struggled, would migrate into heroin, even meth for a while, and then come back out for 9, 12 months, go back in, and it was very, very challenging 6, 7 years, 8 years
Yeah.
really of him. My eldest rebounded, wonderfully. And then my youngest started struggling as well. So it was a very, very challenging time for Joyce and I. What had been for 15 years really on the same page, parenting wise, Joyce and I started to struggle. I wanted to be
Mm.
harder. She wanted to be softer. I didn't want to lend any money. She would lend money, and so we start developing this dynamic that becomes very challenging. But as we went into this phase, I'll be honest with you, I started to lose my confidence as a parent. I started
Mm.
to pull back. I got into my job. I kind of immersed into my job. That was someplace I could control. Felt like when I walked into my house, it was out of control. It was
Mm.
it was a place I was uncomfortable. But at work, I was comfortable. I was like, okay, no,
Yeah.
I can handle work. I mean, I would
Yeah.
start staying late, and I started to let Joyce handle more and just defer to her. Honey, if that's what you want to do, knock yourself out. I'm almost too tired to argue anymore. And not just too tired, a little bit lacking in confidence. I don't know what the right thing is. Do we kick him out? Do we not? I don't know. If you can't kick our son out, there was a time when, right before the kind of the inciting incident of the book, why he went to prison, where he wanted to move back home. And I just said, I just agreed heartily.
Mm.
We argued. And then she made a comment. She says, hon, I just, I just don't think I could live with myself if we said no. If he dies or something happens, I don't think I can live with myself. And when I heard that, I knew that there was one right answer, and that is we're going to let him in if that's what you want to do. Because I also
Mm.
knew that her not being able to live with herself would make it hard for her to live with me. If I had pushed it and
Sure.
something had happened to our son, if he had died, overdosed, anything like that, I'm convinced. Well, I'm not convinced. I fear, that would have been one of those things in marriage that you never get over,
Yeah.
that lives with you, that haunts you your entire life. So that kind of
Oh,
became our
yeah.
MO as things started to struggle.
Yeah. I'm gonna. How long did he? When did he leave home to start with? Was he using before he left? Had he kind of gotten into that lifestyle before he left home, or was it after?
It was really after. So when he went away to college, dropped out of college, and then
Okay.
that's when it started. Yeah.
Okay. What about When you were talking about the 5 years in ministry and all the things that happened there, how did your church react toward you and your sons when they knew things were not good or struggling?
They were pretty good, to be honest. They were good. I mean, I felt the gossip and the words and the lack of,
Oh yeah.
the eroding respect. I felt it. Of course I did. But in some ways I didn't begrudge them. I thought, well, I probably feel the same way.
It is
um,
hard, yeah.
it's hard.
I mean, you want to be the church, or you want your church to be the church, and yet they're people too, and they're just humans, and they do things that sometimes are hurtful, or that we think, why did they do that? Those kind of things.
Exactly. But overall they were great.
That's
When we had our church crisis, it was helpful that I stayed another year, even though my family was struggling. And they had asked me, and they wanted, so it was good. It was good, but it was tough. It was tough. I felt, some people leave with a bang and they criticize and they take people with them. I left with a whimper. I just left. I was like, I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to try to do anything weird. I'm just going to, in the dark of night, just leave. And I did.
I think it's so hard on something, and I've worked with pastors' kids over the years and things. I mean, some kids handle it better than others, but you're on stage, but they're on stage too, with every time they walk in that building. And I just always have so much empathy for pastors' kids, and I think some churches handle it well, and some churches kind of struggle with that. But
yeah, I'm with you, and we've talked about it now. My oldest is 38. My youngest is 35. So, they're older now, and we talk about these times especially as I was writing the book, we would talk a lot about how they felt, because I would write, I was like, what happened to our family? I don't know if you're like this, but sometimes trauma happens in my life, or just challenging times, and I kind of forget a lot of it. And so in writing the book, I was required to remember what were the moments. And I remember the In-N-Out meeting with my son, Jess. I was like, oh my gosh, that's right. You told, and then so we went through all that. He and I talked about it.
yeah.
Then I remember this time when I said no to a school dance, when he freaked out, and we just talked about it. And he was like, Dad, I was feeling such pressure. On one hand, the world was calling. On the other hand, you raised me this way, and I just didn't know what to do. So you're right. As kids of preachers, it is a very challenging situation to be in.
Yeah, it is, and I just have so much empathy for them and for their parents, because you've got to deal with whatever the church is going through too. If you were someone that wasn't the pastor and the struggles with the kids, and say you were in a church and they really weren't supportive, would you tell someone that it might be best to find another church that would be supportive as they went through that?
I guess yes, or develop a thick skin. I mean, in some ways, as parents of teens, I don't know. You almost have to say, "Screw the world. I'm gonna do what I want to do." Amen. Get advice. Yes. Amen. Pray. That the Spirit will lead you, right? But in some ways, if your kid is struggling, it's just not worth trying to please all the people, And if you're a leader, let's say you're a Bible study leader, and you got, you feel the pressure. Yeah. I don't know. In some ways, don't lead the Bible. If you can't get a thick skin, don't lead the Bible study. If you can't, be happy in the church where you feel like people maybe are judging you, then you might have to leave. So I think, the teenage years, it's only a discrete period, right? It's not forever. It's 3, 4, 2, 5, 7, whatever it is for you. It's going to be over. It's going to be over. And if you could, it's almost like you have to have a forehead of flint, where you just go, okay, we're going to weather this, and we're not going to embarrass ourselves. We're not going to do something stupid. We're not going to lose the relationship with our kid and just, you know what I'm saying? Those were kind of some of the mantras we developed. My wife was, I don't want to lose the relationship with my kids.
Yeah.
I just can't. That's the one thing I can't lose, is a connection, regardless of what that means. And she just had to have it. And I was like, amen.
Yeah. Well, I asked that. I know I've kind of put you on the spot, but I've had some families that have gone through that where they felt really that they were a couple of them that really felt they were going to get the church's support. They were very open, transparent, and they didn't. In fact, it just turned backwards. And I've had a couple of families where the church just embraced them and loved them, and both of the first families for the church did, and they ended up leaving, which was hard anyway. These had been churches they had been in for years that people had seen their kids grow up, and now they just expected them to walk with them, and they didn't. And so that's kind of a thing. I think you've got to do what's best for you and your family.
You do
at that point,
because those friends are going to.
Is.
Yeah, those friends are. I mean, they may last your lifetime, but they're probably going to be gone one day. Your kid is right. Your kid's your kid forever.
Absolutely.
And even back to when my wife said, I can't live with myself. I was like, you know what? I may lose my son. I may lose a lot, but I just don't want to lose my wife. I got to stay married. If I lose, because in a way I'd lost my church. I was struggling in my faith. My sons, at one point looked like they were all going to just become knuckleheads. And I was like, I'm going to be left with one thing. I'm going to be left with one thing, and that is my wife. I cannot lose my wife. I mean, life's not, I just couldn't do it.
No. And I think that's really biblical, I guess. I mean, it's God first, spouse second, and you don't want to lose that relationship because you want that to last. We don't get married to stay married till the things get tough, and then we decide to split. It's to go through those together, which kind of bring us up to when he went to prison, and then how did you and Joyce deal with that?
That was another layer of challenging. We both handled it in our way. I tend to pull into myself. I go to the mountains, go to the beach. I'm by myself. I kind of didn't stay tied in with friends. I got down to very few friends, couple, one or two. Joyce went the other way. She needed people in her life, but yet she didn't need toxic people. So it was this weird thing. And so we're reacting in different ways. I wanted to buy a camper van. She's like, well, wait, what, are you just going to leave? You're just going to just spend time in the Sierra Nevada? What am I going to do here? And I was like, no, that's not what I'm saying. So you have these weird arguments and she again wants to nurture Lucas, and I want to keep it real. I mean, even one time when he got to his full-time prison, they have kind of these holding areas in California because there's such overcrowding of prisoners. There's jail, which was a 6-month stay, if you can believe that. Then there's a thing called reception, which was another 6-month stay. And then he finally gets his final prison. And even there, we would drive out together, hour and a half, see him, and we would talk over each other. I would irritate Joyce. She would irritate me. She's trying to nurture him. I'm trying to keep it real and see how he's really doing. He did develop, we start to share our faith. He starts reading C.S. Lewis. We start having these incredible talks. And then she's annoyed that he and I are talking, you know what I mean? And then I'm annoyed. Yes. So it was in some ways our toughest time ever. And in other ways, it was you and me, honey, against the world. The city, there a lot of my son's accidental killing of a man when he was driving was public news. The man was a very popular school teacher in our city. So to say that we felt like we had a scarlet letter on our chest is an understatement. We felt like pariahs. We felt horrible. Sometimes we didn't want to go out because so in another way it was me and you, honey. It's just us. There's no one else. It's just us. And we felt lost spiritually, yet dialed in with each other. We would read 3 books. We'd read about David, Solomon, and Job. David, Solomon, Job. David, Solomon, Job. Just that's it. Psalms, Ecclesiastes, and Job. And it was mostly Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes, it's a very somber book.
Yeah.
it's a little stoic. It's just, if you are
Yeah.
at the lowest point of your life, I'm getting emotional here.
No, that's fine.
If you can barely pray,
Hmm.
if you can barely pray, Solomon in Ecclesiastes is about all you can read.
Yeah.
That's all I could read.
Yeah.
That's all she could read. So in that sense, we were partners at the bottom. I guess that's partners in the pit. How's that for a phrase? And so it was tough. We had, it was tough, but then we also bonded in a way that that has cemented us for life.
I think it's so interesting sometimes, talk to couples and maybe they're starting to read through the Bible the first time and they get to some of the books and why is Job in here? Or why is Ecclesiastes in here? And I want to say, well, they're all there for a purpose and they become meaningful when we need them. And we're so, and they're there for us in those times, and just helps me continue to realize the how amazing the Bible is, and how there are things in there to hit us. I think we've all had the experience. We read something and then read again and you think, I've read through the Bible 10 times and I don't think that verse has ever been there before. It has, but it didn't have meaning like it did then. And I think a lot of what you're saying is that that's where you guys needed to be at that point. And those books were there when you needed them.
That's if Ecclesiastes and Psalms and Job weren't in the Bible, I think I would have just not had anything to read, because when you are feeling that way, victory verses are discouraging, because you look at your life, you say, okay, I've believed that verse for all this time, and yet at this aperture of my life, at this moment, it just looks horrible. It looks everything except that. And so to have Solomon be so practical and so pessimistic and so realistic and yet hang on spiritually, it was ennobling. It was encouraging, was the only way I could hang on to God, because I just had nothing. So much of what I had believed, the Bible says hope deferred makes the heart sick. My hope was deferred for a season. It was deferred.
Yeah.
The hope was not there. It was put off for a season. It was completely gone for a season. And it makes the heart sick. And my heart was sick. And so but I didn't want to shake my fist at God. I didn't want to say no. I didn't want to, if I was going to limp or be dragged into heaven, my back scraped so bad it was bloody, I was like, okay, that's the condition I'll go in. I have no pride at this point. It doesn't have, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like hanging on to marriage. I kind of hung on to God about the same way. I was like, God, I do not know what's happening. I don't know why my life looked like this. I look so unchristian at this point. I may be the worst example of a Christian on the planet if you look at me from the outside, but I was like, I'm going to hang on. It won't be pretty, but I'm going to hang on. Yeah. And I kind of did.
Well, and I think it's interesting how you guys both, I guess, handled things different. What did you see with Joyce? I guess you were reading the same things together, but just your differences and just being male, female. What was her faith like during that?
It was very similar. Very similar. So she has her quiet time in her bedroom, which is right across here. And this is my office and I have it here. So I would carry, the verse over there and say, did you see this? Yes, honey, we read that 43 times over the last 3 months. Oh, I know, but look at this. And she would come in here and she would show me a verse. So, it was two people in the pit. That's all I can say. It was two people in the pit, kind of like finding little glimmers of light and saying, look at this glimmer. Isn't this cool? Isn't this cool? And saying, yeah, that's cool. and it just
Yeah.
that kind of helped us.
Well, there's a bonding that happens there. There's a connection that happens there in that situation, at a really deep level.
You're
Yeah.
right.
So you were talking about some of your visits with Lucas when he was in prison or jail, whichever it happened to be. And you mentioned kind of like he was talking with you about his faith then. What did you see in him during those times?
After he was in for a while, I wrote him a letter, first person historical fiction, David and Bathsheba. So I was David. I wrote him a letter as if I was David and I saw Bathsheba on the
Mm.
roof. It wasn't porn, but it was real. It was real.
Yeah. Yeah.
I kept it real. I was like,
Yeah.
this happened, Lucas. This is in the Bible. And I didn't say that. I just wrote it. I just said this. Because what happened is a guy named Preacher Man in prison had said to Lucas, hey, Lucas, you killed a man, but so did David. And Lucas called me that night and he said, hey, Dad, David killed a man, and this is what this guy told me. And I was like, yeah, he did. So the next day I wrote him this letter and I worked on it for a couple of weeks, but I'd never written fiction, not fiction, but historical fiction, never written a first person thing. And so I wrote this. It was really interesting, right? It was immersive. It was David sees her and he acts on it, and then they get together and she's pregnant. And then, he calls Uriah back. I mean, it's a novel. It's a fascinating story. If you really get into it, you start writing it, and you start writing dialogue of him and Uriah, right? All this. And so I do this and I send it to him a few weeks later and he just loved it. So it sparked this spiritual interest in Lucas that had never been there very much. He just was the least spiritual of my three sons. Mm-hmm. But he read this, he shared it with his inmates, his cellmates, and they were like, oh, this is incredible. So they love the story of David and Bathsheba, the way David, as you know, in Psalm 51, he realizes that, he's confronted by Nathan. He realizes his error. He beautifully turns his life around. So Lucas did that. I mean, he channeled David and turned his life and started to read not just the Bible, but, spiritual books, Man's Search for Meaning, C.S. Lewis. There's a fellow that used to be the head of the NIH, a Christian who wrote a book on evolution. He read that. So he read all kinds of stuff. And so his mind is on fire. My mind is on fire. So we start connecting as a father and son in this most shocking way, and it was beautiful. It was beautiful. He becomes a Christian as he gets baptized after he gets out of prison. He turns his life around. He married a gal from our old church. And, it was beyond what I could have ever dreamed of. But yes, to have that place where he's humbled in his life. And now we're reading these mind stretching books that help both of us. It helped him come to faith, and it helped me rediscover faith. I'm reading the same books. My mind is starting to get on fire again. And it was this unbelievable joint climbing venture of him climbing out of his pit, me climbing out of my pit, me finding God again, him finding God for the first time. And to this day, he's been out for 5-6 years. Even as recently as this weekend, we did a men's Guidroz, my family's, with grandkids and my sons and me, right? It's pretty cool having 3 generations together. But we had these incredible spiritual talks, and so to this day, he's wrestling with God like I'm wrestling with God and loving God. So yeah, it was a pretty cool experience.
That's such an amazing how God works at the times when we're our lowest, and he shows up, and you just think, wow, you were there all the time. But sometimes we just don't feel it. Amazing. So when I guess, how long ago was it? You said he's been out 5 or 6 years. How long ago was the accident?
So he had the accident in 2016. So 2016, he got a 10-year prison sentence. He served 3 of those. California has a very aggressive prison reduction program. If you take classes, if you go to church, if you go to Alcoholics Anonymous, you do all these things while you're in prison. You whittle off a week, a month, if you get an AA degree, you whittle off 6 months. So you have all these things you can do.
Oh,
And he
wow.
did. He got on top of his life. He took every single course he could. He did every program, and he whittled it down to 3 years.
Wow. Well, that's being motivated for sure.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So then writing the book, that's the most public now. Everything is public in a way that obviously it was very public for you where you guys lived at that time. What's it been like sharing that dark season, just getting it out there where everyone can see it?
It's been incredible, to be honest. I was afraid, so there might be some backlash. My journey hasn't been a perfect spiritual journey. I'm not even today. I'm not, where I'd like to be. I'm loving God as much as I ever have. But, I thought there might be some backlash, but it's been incredible. People struggle like I did.
Yeah.
People have dark periods. Sometimes it's with their spouse. Sometimes it's with their kids. Sometimes it's with themselves, their own mental health, whatever. The demon doesn't matter. The demon, the texture, the face of the demon doesn't matter. We all have them. I mean, you may be an exception, but
No. I wish I could say that, but no, not in this life.
And if you said yes, I was going to talk to your wife and get the real skinny.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Oh yeah, she'll tell me. And so I'm one man with one journey, with one beautiful story of reconnecting with my son, reconnecting with God, staying with my wife. It's a beautiful story. I didn't ever see it. Even when I started writing the book, I didn't see all the elements of the story. It evolved, and as I'm getting older, as Luke's out of prison, right? I'm still writing the book, and it starts to come together, and I start to realize what a picture it is. And when I wrote the book, I was real. I did not sugarcoat. Maybe too real, but I got a review. I was having dinner the other night. I thought, I'm going to check my reviews, and I must admit, this was a couple days ago. This fed my soul. But somebody I didn't know, she read it. She just said this was one of the bravest things I ever read, and I thought,
wow,
oh, God, thank you. I
absolutely.
I like real. I just don't like sugary sweet Hallmark. I just don't. And so I thought, if I'm going to do this, put all the money into this, I self-published, I learned to write. I invested tens of thousands of dollars into this book. I wanted to honor the victim. That was huge to me. I'm not going to write a book that, doesn't appreciate the fact that a man lost his life. I honored the victim. Number two, I'm not going to pie in the sky it. I'm going to talk about, how dark it was. I'm going to get real about my marriage and how testy it was and what we did to make it, to stay together and not turn on each other. And, I really tried to keep it real. And, I think some people have told me, they could only read 3 or 4 pages a night. It was too real. And I, amen. I don't know what to say about that. I just felt like I almost needed to do it the way I needed to do it. Keep it real, keep it raw. And I think there's some people that dig it, love it, benefit from it. Maybe it's a little too much for other people, but most, 100 and some people have reviewed the book, and it's, it's been incredible feedback. So to answer your question, I have been so encouraged. I hope that people, can just see how one man overcame, and then they find their own way. You give great advice. I love some of the things you say. I think I give decent advice, but I don't know if you agree with me. People have to find their own way. They got to wrestle with each other. They got to wrestle with God, and they got to wrestle through it. Do you tend to agree?
Absolutely. And I think what I've learned, and I think you and have too, that those hard times are where we really grow. And as much as I wish God would just whatever me and everything would be okay, I wouldn't have grown that way. And I love your honesty. I think people want that, and especially people that have gone through things similar and they're picking up your book because they want to hear what you've got to say. They're going to know if you're sugarcoating. I mean, they and being real is what helps people. I mean, I decided a long time ago, people may criticize me, but I'm not going to sugarcoat things. I'm going to talk about it real, and whether we're talking about marriage or anything with people in the counseling room, you got to be real, because I think that's because we have a real God, and God can bring healing no matter what it is.
Even the fact that God let Ecclesiastes stay in.
Yes.
I mean, I love it. I love what that says about God. I do
too.
And David and Bathsheba.
I've never really. Yeah. Yeah, I think, yes. I mean, that story alone, I think, has helped so many people, so many men I've worked with that have strayed away from their marriage, whether it was an affair or pornography or whatever it is, to realize that, and then how God looked at David and what gave, all that is just so amazing. I guess it's because God knows us so much better than we know ourselves. He knew we needed that story to be in there. He knew Solomon needed to write Ecclesiastes for us, and I had never really heard anybody really talk about just hanging those three books, but it makes so much sense, because that helps us. I don't know. I think it connects us with God. Sometimes I think read something great in the Bible or a psalm that's just yes and praise, and you think, wow, that's great. But probably where I connect the most is when I think, oh yeah, that's me. That's why most of us like Peter probably more than the other disciples, because he's like us. He was just out there and did whatever came to his mind, and impulsive, and yet, my gosh, how God used him was amazing. So
Yeah.
it gives us
And you
hope.
read some of those Psalms, David just
Yeah.
he looks like Peter. He's
Mm-hmm.
despairing and he's
Yeah.
emotional, and you think, come on, man, pull it together. When you're strong, you think that. But when you're not strong, when you're struggling, you go, thank you, David, for being honest. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And I'm with you. I think God is real with us, and he is. Look, even I continue to write just for my own edification. I continue to write historical fiction, basically in the Bible. I'm writing Moses right now, and you
Oh,
really
cool.
look at Moses and you realize, I don't know, you just see the dirt under the fingernails. When you immerse in that kind of a way, you start to see what really happened, and some of the dialogue, even with
Yes.
his wife Zipporah, and probably what she said and what he's, you know what I mean? You start getting it. And I don't know, it makes the Bible more accessible to me. And I feel closer to God when it's real. So yeah, I'm with you
Mm-hmm.
100%.
Yeah, it's funny you brought up or arrived at Moses, because I had to redefine Moses for me, because my Moses was Charlton Heston for a long time, because that, and so, and Charlton Heston to me was this big, strong, did everything right. And so to go back and really see, oh yeah, that was a great movie, but this is who Moses really was and what he
Yes.
struggled with, and that's really cool. I'm anxious to read that. That's really cool. I love that you're writing historical fiction like that out of the Bible. I think there's such a need for that, because I think it just does something. It helps us get, I don't know, into the stories maybe, and just identify with people, and
It
sometimes it's
does.
just
It's incredible.
very
I'm doing,
encouraging to do that. Yeah.
yeah, I'm doing Joseph, Moses, Joshua, which is the timeline, right? Moses,
Yeah.
Joseph was not that far in previous to Moses. They were, Joseph's grandson would have known Moses, right? So it's this very interesting period, and I'm about 2/3 in, and I'm like, wow, this is so fascinating to
Mm-hmm.
see the dynamics and the rebellion and Moses. Yeah, to me, it's one of the great ways to study the Bible after you've been with the Bible for 45 years, which I have.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
17, when I became a Christian, and it's a long time ago. I'm 64 now. It's a long time, and the Bible's still awesome. Still love reading it, but there is a layer that you can pull back when you do something like what I'm doing, where you see them in a new way, in a fresh way, and you see God in a fresh way. It's been really, really fascinating.
Mm. That's so cool. That's awesome. Maybe just one couple of things I wanted to ask you about. One, I think just for couples that have gone through things, are going through things, a couple of, I guess, your suggestions or encouragement as couples go through things. How do you make the room for each other during those times? Because so many times you see couples draw apart during
Mm.
those times. How did what was what would you say were the main things that helped you guys go through that together and come out to where you are today?
I think that we did allow for space. Back to the camper van. I did get a camper van. I do spend
I
long
was going to
weekends.
ask you about
No,
that. Yeah.
yeah, I did. I bought. I do love the mountains. I'm only a few hours from the Sierra Nevadas, which are some of the most
No, that's
beautiful range.
nice.
One of the most beautiful ranges. A lot of granite, just beautiful. I have a dog named
Hmm.
Mumford. And I
Hmm.
still do love being alone with God. And this is super corny, okay, but I'm still going to say it. In some ways, I feel like I'm hiking with God. I know that's
Oh,
corny,
that's
but
cool.
it's true. It's just true. At my age, I don't know, for whatever reason, when I'm out there, I'm talking to God. I'm actually talking out loud a lot of times.
Yeah.
Embarrassing, yes, but it's true. And yet it's one of the most worshipful experiences I have. Anyway, so did I just go off and get a camper van and say screw you, Joyce? No, I got a little one, right, a pop up, and I was like, sweetheart, I think I'm going to take a long weekend. We talked, and I listened to my gut. I didn't just say, look, I'm going to do this. I know my wife,
Yeah.
right? I know how we. And I think that's, if I have one superpower, and I use that lowercase s,
Yeah.
it's I know that I know how to work with her, and I know that
Hmm.
there's going to be some give, and there's going to be some take. As she's gotten really, really super into the grandkids. I'm into my grandkids, but
Sure.
I'm not quite the same way. And so for me, it's a little more fun to spend time out there. And then she gets extra time with them. And then, you know what I mean?
A balance.
It's this balance and this massaging and the
Yeah.
nuances and understanding them. If we're 42 years in, I know you got me beat a little bit.
Not much.
Not a competition, right? But at 42 years in, but heck, at 32, at 22, you have to learn that nuance. You got to follow your gut. And I think listening to my gut, working with my gut and what it's telling me, and then what it's telling me about her and how we can work together, it's what we've learned to do. When we were driving away that one time after talking to Lucas in prison, and we're driving home, and I said, Lucas has suggested to me, he said, Dad, you guys are so weird. Is, why are you fighting in front of me? You get to see me once every other week, and now you're fighting. Not fighting, arguing, bickering.
Yeah.
I was like, oh. He goes, Dad, you should just come see me alone. Look, I want to talk to you about C.S. Lewis. I want to talk to you about all these things, but it's just you and me. And so on the way home, I had said to Joy, I said, honey, what would you think about maybe just kind of sort of possibly you visit Lucas one week and I'll go the next, right? That could be a fight, right? She could say like, are you freaking kidding me?
Yeah.
We can't, we've been married for all this time. We can't even visit our son in prison together. But, I kind of massaged it, and, she thought
Yeah.
about it, and all of a sudden we visited separately. And guess what? Lucas and I had the best talks we've ever had in our life about God and life and recovering and repentance. You know what I mean? So,
That's so
and
good.
Joyce and I made it. She enjoyed her visits. So I guess what I've learned is to try to really be smart and listen to your gut and what it's telling you about your particular spouse, your particular relationship, and how to handle the trials, whatever they are. Don't just
Mm.
bulldoze, listen, pray for the Spirit to, to nurture your gut, and then listen to your gut and do the right thing with your wife.
Oh, that's so good. Because I learned a long time ago, there's some things that I'd prayed about. God's not going to change anything in me or Nancy that's not good for our marriage or for each other. And you just trust him with that. And so then you can go ahead and say those things, or, hey, let's go on different weeks or whatever. And it worked out for both of you. That's really cool. And if you're both praying, it really makes it easier for sure.
Yes.
For that to happen. Last question, and you kind of answered a little bit leading up to it, but like today, what do you enjoy, or what do you love about your marriage today?
42 years in is a sweet spot. Remember I talked earlier about the golden years with your kids, 9 to 12.
Yeah.
In some ways, at least for us, it's the golden years. I mean, just last night, Joyce, I was a little snippy with her. We were watching a show, and she starts talking right when this dialogue comes on that I really want to hear. So I'm like, I'm annoyed. And so I got snippy with her. But, in the old days, she would, maybe get sullen, and now it's going to be a thing. And now we're going to go to bed, and we're going to be fine. But, it's a little thing, right? It's going to take a day to get over, an hour, whatever. But what's beautiful about this point is, she didn't even notice. I mean, she noticed, but she's laughing in a minute. It didn't become a thing. So I think one of the beauties of being this far in, having invested in your relationship, having been through what we've been through, and yet we stayed together, we stayed with God. Our spiritual connection is as strong as ever. Having invested that, now it's not that we don't have any troubles, but it's easier to get over the troubles. And so we're in kind of a sweet spot where, there's a lot more unity and a lot less challenge, a lot fewer challenges. So I'd say that's kind of where we're at right now, and we're loving each other.
It's so good. And I just think of the couples that just don't persevere through some of those hard times to get where you guys are today, because Nancy and I are saying, well, we choose our battles a lot better. We recover much quicker. We're able to laugh at ourselves a lot better. And it is a very special season of marriage. And I'm glad you guys are enjoying it like that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Ken, this has been great. I want people to know, well, obviously the book is so good, Letters to My Son in Prison. And then I was gotten on your website. I love, you have your weekly essay. Just encourage people to go to the website and just find out more about you there. Any other place that they can find you?
That's the best place, kenguidroz.com. You're right. It's the weekly essay in the book right now. So it's fun. I talk about marriage. I talk about parenting, and just life.
Oh, yeah. I did all kinds of great things. I just love messing around with it. And I'm going to be getting the essay because I think we think a lot alike. So I'm excited about that.
Awesome.
Thank you for the book. Thank you for taking your time today. Thanks for being willing to share an incredible story and what God's done. Thanks again.
You're very welcome, and thank you so much.